We
Haters.
are all negative Nancy's. I am down on the New York Knicks offseason, where everybody else seems very up on it.
You hate friendship, Wes? Like, what's the problem here?
It's cool, but also we're not in college anymore. So grow up, New York Knicks would be my one thing.
Okay.
No, that's not really the take here. The take is I like the moves that they made, but I do think I like the moves that they made in a vacuum and from sort of an asset management sort of study, but I think it very much narrowed their path to winning a championship here. They are built to match up with the Celtics. They are not built to beat the Celtics. They are basically a worse Celtics now. This is a team that is... I look at what the 76ers did this offseason, right? You have Joel Embiid, you have Tyrese Maxey, you add Paul George, a very, very different team than the Boston Celtics are. They are trying to beat scissors with rock, where it feels like the Knicks are just trying to beat scissors with like a toenail clipper, right? It doesn't exactly work. It's just a worse version of whatever it is that the Boston Celtics are. I think they're a good team. I think they're one of the best 3 or 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. Their path to beating the Celtics is hoping that the Celtics get hurt, they stay healthy, and then they could beat, and you get a good Jalen Brunson series, and then you go ahead and win. The problem with that angle too is that Boston was incredibly healthy last year outside of the course Kristaps Porzingis, and it's the Knicks that have all the injury concerns with OG Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson, and they lost Isaiah Hartenstein, so they have a center, a concern at center. There's a hole there. I know that we're all saying like, well, now they can kind of move the Julius Randle thing and maybe they can address center. Julius Randle is weirdly really important to this team now because you spent all of your draft picks, all the stuff that you've had to move in a big player deal. You've just sent 5 first-round picks to Mikal Bridges, who we all like, but nobody's going to sit here and say that guy can run your offense. The Brooklyn Nets found that out the hard way. He's not a guy that's creating advantages for you on the offensive side of the ball. Julius Randle can at least do that as a mismatch kind of guy for against certain teams in certain matchups. So he becomes weirdly important to this roster. You can't just trade him for a center, for instance, because now you basically have one shot creator, one advantage creator, and Jalen Brunson. So I just think that while the path is there, they are still a very good team in the East. All the moves that they've made and the opportunity cost that came with it and the way that they're constructed now, their path to actually winning the championship is incredibly narrow.
I agree wholeheartedly with they're too similar to the Celtics. I think when Chris and I talked about it, we kind of agreed, like, you want to beat Boston by being bigger and more overpowering than Boston. Mm-hmm. The Knicks don't really have a pathway to doing that. If you don't have Randall on the team, for instance, how many players on the Celtics roster are better than Mikal Bridges at creating offense?
All of them.
Yeah, probably, right? Like,
well, the starters, yeah.
White, Holiday, and Brown are all better than Bridges at creating offense, in my opinion. Holiday, you could maybe quibble with, but he does have a pull-up 3 game that Bridges doesn't really have. So, yeah, it almost doubled down on a aspect of their team that maybe we were just kind of celebrating while it was happening, but that I don't know if it is sustainable, which is making Brunson be everything on their offense. Like, great, he did it for the past 2 playoffs, and you got to late in the second round both times, but is that really what you want your team to be? Because you kind of are locked into that being what your team is. And he's never, it's not like he won a title and you doubled down on it. He got to the second round twice, and he got hurt. So
in an Eastern Conference that when the Boston Celtics make it through, everybody's like, well, it was a weak Eastern Conference. But the Knicks, they get to the second round, to your point, and they're like, wow, what a great season for them. They made it through the East. It's like, well, when the East actually gets good, where do the Knicks stack up is kind of my problem there. And yeah, I don't know. To me, I just don't love the doubling down on what it is that they did well. I actually would have preferred more of an OKC style offseason where it's like, okay, we're really good. It was a nice season for us. Let's pick 2 spots where we need to be better and do that. And I think the reason why most people are celebrating the Knicks is because, A, they made it to the playoffs 2 years in a row, and that's awesome for the Knicks based on where this franchise had been. They're making sensible asset moves, which, again, I like the stuff that they're doing as a front office, getting Jalen Brunson to take less, the way that they've got like all these interesting Dante DiVincenzo, you mentioned him earlier, maybe the best mid-level signing we've seen in 10 years. all these things.
Yeah.
All of these stuff are wins. These are all wins, no doubt about it. But the other reason that we're celebrating it is like the whole power of friendship. Like, but if the number one reason you like a team's offseason is that all the guys they have went to the same college, it feels like that should not be on the top of the list of things that you measure an offseason by. It should be, did this team actually meaningfully get better in a way that helps them win the championship? And I guess you could say it did, but I just think that the opportunity cost with this, because this is basically the roster now, is like, okay, so this is it? This was the final form? That's where I have my biggest concern.
To play devil's advocate a little bit, I think
Please
it
do.
is somewhat kind of I could make the same case you were kind of making with Orlando here, where it's like Mikal Bridges might have been the best thing that they could have gotten this summer. And if they felt like they needed to get better and just giving OG Anunoby a new contract and, whatever, the campaign edition, and maybe, I don't know, Hartenstein probably wasn't sticking around regardless because of the bird rights issue.
They definitely
Maybe they
told
felt like
you-
they needed to do something, and
Yeah.
you don't always, like ideally, what would the other player have been like? Like a scoring wing, probably, right? Like Mikal, who could score, might be like, but who's that? And is that guy actually available? And
It's a totally fair point. I guess my only concern is when Brooklyn asked for 5 first-round picks, say no.
sure, so don't give
Yeah.
up so much. They
Right, don't
have a
give up
couple
everything.
still. I think they have
Right.
two firsts that they can still trade, so
And,
they
like, there's
didn't
a
give up
swap in there
literally
somewhere.
everything.
Yeah, but that's the point is, well, who are you trading? Because you're built your whole identity on all these Villanova guys staying together. So you're going to get rid of one of them? That seems like blasphemous at this point. But maybe you can. And then
OG would be the one I think you wonder if you try to trade, but then like there's a lot of injury risk and health value questions I think with him as a.
But
trade
also,
chip.
like if you're talking about the matching up with Boston, to me, Anunoby's the least replaceable piece
Yes,
on the roster.
100%.
Right.
Because Mikal, like, maybe we'll see it more now that he's on a good team again. He's not a power wing defender. He is a guard defender if you want him to be at his best. He should be guarding Derek White. And maybe he can switch when he runs a pick and roll with Tatum or something. But the idea of Mikal Bridges, like, trying to contain a Jaylen Brown, like, F it, I'm getting to the basket drive, that's not really what his role is. OG can be that. So they kind of need both. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Hart to me is the guy that I would be intrigued about what the conversations look like, because they don't really need him anymore that badly. And he's kind of like the first guy they got from that Villanova group. So is he off limits? He has a podcast co-host who's the superstar of the team. That's the one I would be intrigued by.
Like I said, I like the moves they made in the vacuum, but the assignment here was like, are you lower or higher than consensus? And I just feel like everybody's sort of anointing the Knicks as one of the winners of the offseason. I'm just not there. I'm not that high on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Chris,
Let me ask. Well, I have two thoughts about this. Number one, I wondered if they feel like there wasn't gonna someone come available in 12 months or something, right? Like if they're just thinking about Embiid, that just feels like it's not gonna happen at this point.
Right.
That was kind of the one we kind of wondered. Okay, like is he gonna stay in Philly? Like would that be the right move? Doesn't seem like that's a thing. This makes me wonder how much they think Giannis is tied to Milwaukee. That would be the other one. And other than that, guys break loose, things happen. But if they were going to do something, and this is what the market they felt like, it's like, I would have rather them traded for Mikal Bridges than trying to do the Donovan Mitchell thing, which he does not fit with Brunson. I think that would have been a bad idea. And I would prefer this to Karl Anthony Towns trade. So if you're saying like they were pressed to do something this summer, and they're thinking in the future, like, okay, who's actually going to be available? That's a name player that can help us be better, that fits what we're building here, because they're very tied into this identity of the Tibbsiness, the toughness, all that stuff. This feels like the best option to me. And that's where, and I do think that even if they are going head to head with the Celtics in strength, there's a chance like they can really attack everyone else in the East and be pretty darn successful. Even if they maybe can't beat Boston, I think there's a world where they end up being the second best team in the East.
How do you think they match up with Philly?
That's the Embiid thing. They really just need not Mitchell Robinson to be entirely healthy the entire season. He becomes
Put him
one
on
of the
ice.
Yeah.
Just have
Like,
have Precious Achua play like 38 minutes a game all season, and then
do you
bring
remember
Mitchell
when
for the
there were-
playoffs.
There was that story where Mitchell Robinson was living with his high school coach. He had his high school coach move in with him after the high school coach's wife died. They should get that high school coach on payroll just to help him do get him on his recovery routine, harp him on do some bike work in his
Babysitter.
apartment.
Basically,
Yes, I didn't want to say it, but yes, get someone to keep Mitchell Robinson's body functioning, and if there's a older veteran center you can sign for your 15th roster spot later in the year to just give you some fouls on it.
Taj
in the
Gibson
playoffs.
just got snatched out
Gibson
from Tibbs's
is-
grasp. What a bummer.
Yeah. Tristan Thompson, just get a guy to foul Joel Embiid in the playoffs, honestly, and just have that. And you have to hope that everything else is enough. You have to hope that McHale can do a great job on Tyrese, that you have the wings to throw Paul George, and that asking Embiid to problem solve for all of that is a critical fact to victory. I think that's a series. I mean, we'd want to see it anyway. I want to see that series even more now because of the contrasting styles.
The one thing the Knicks have is that they are still fairly deep. They didn't have to give up a lot of players to get Bridges, which is nice. They gave up Bogdanovich.
Tibbs doesn't believe that they're deep. He believes he is. You know what I mean? That's the part of this as well. It's he's going to.
Well, I don't mean they're
going
to play 12 guys in a game 7 or anything, but I just mean they can withstand some injuries. Obviously not, last year you hope that was a fluke, but they have 8-9 guys I like.
Yeah.
So it's not like Boston having their starting 5 plus, Hauser and Horford and whatnot is one too many guys for New York to match up with. They have McBride still. They have Hart probably off the bench, we would assume. They have some of those center. I mean, Precious is still a free agent. They got Campaign. I mean, we'll see, but they have a real rotation. They're not one of these teams that makes their big move and then is just kind of a broken roster for a year until the next off season. They kept the powder dry from a player standpoint, and Randall, who will be back.
I have a personal question before we sign off here.
Okay. Can I just, Wes, one more thing? I just want to ask you one more thing about the Knicks.
Okay.
How does the Tibbs part of this factor into this to you?
In what sense?
Just how he coaches, what he wants to do, the what he's going to demand of that team. Does that does that mesh to you with what they're going to be? Because I think there's obviously pros to it, but I think there also is a downside of the way Tibbs coaches.
I guess. I think the downside with Tibbs has always been a little overstated in terms of him running his players into the ground. They get players who tend to be okay with that. And I also know that there's been a lot of studies and stuff in terms of whether or not that actually matters in the minutes versus the games off and all these things. And I don't pretend to be scientifically inclined to know anything about any of that stuff. But Tibbs has generally coached teams into the playoffs. He's had a very successful coaching career, so I'll just go with what he's doing. The one thing I will say is when Tibbs is your coach, there's going to be an element of physicality to your team. And I think that's the thing that the Knicks need more than anything. Especially when you look at this roster, there's maybe a little too many finesse players on this roster that would be finesse players in a different context, in a different environment. But because they're on the Knicks under Tibbs, there is a physical element to the way that this team plays. And if you are going to beat Boston, Tibbs to me is an advantage in that, not a disadvantage. And that's really the whole thing here is the East now officially goes through Boston. How do you get through them? And I think Tibbs would help.
I will say, too, in terms of the Celtics matchup, if they keep Randall, they can play with him at the 5 and match up with Porzingis at the 5 in a way that, honestly, not a lot of other teams can. So, I don't know. I think they're going to keep Randall. I think it's more likely that Josh Hart...
Yeah,
I think Hart would be more likely to get traded, setting aside the Villanova nonsense, than Randall because of just what are they going to do if they don't have Randall's style.
If you trade Randall, it has to be for an all-star type of shot creator, advantage creator, and a guy with size, right? A big, because they've already lost Hartenstein. So, and those players are just really hard to find. So to your point, if they do make some sort of needle-moving acquisition, it might be like Josh Hart, one other chunky contract, whatever draft picks they have left, and all of that.